This episode is supported in part by Sacred Wright's public scholarship on religion, gender, and sexuality through a grant from the E. Rhodes and Leona B. Carpenter Foundation. You can find Sacred Wrights online at sacred-rights.org and the Carpenter Foundation at carpenterfoundation.us. Welcome to Classical Ideas. This is Greg Soden. On this episode, I am delighted to welcome Dr. Tess Starman. Tess Starman is a recent PhD graduate in Sociology at Howard University and is an incoming assistant professor at Simpson College. Her research specializes on intersections of race, gender, sexuality, and power at the nexus of religion and politics. She studies Christian progressive attitudes, religious exiting, and religion's impact on political attitudes and engagement. We discuss her dissertation entitled A Corrupted Faith, the Role of Power in the Process of Christian Disaffiliation and the Rise of the Religious Nuns, which examines the religious exiting process and non-religious identity formation of ex-Christians. You can find her work at tessstarman.com. Thank you so much for listening. Dr. Tess Starman, welcome to Classical Ideas.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I am delighted to officially say, Doctor, I know that you've completed your dissertation defense recently, so we'll get into that. But why don't you just go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit to the listeners out there so they know just a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Sure, absolutely. Well, hi everyone. My name is Tess Starman, and I study the relationship between Christianity and systems of power. And by systems of power, I mainly look at political power, white supremacy, patriarchy, cis heteronormativity, and then intersections of all of these. And as Greg mentioned, I recently completed my PhD in sociology from Howard University just in May, a few months ago. And this fall, I'll be an incoming assistant professor of sociology at Simpson College.
Wonderful. I would love to know a little bit about your academic journey. Can you tell me some major turning points along the way that kind of led you down this sociological path with regards to focusing on race, gender, sexuality, religion, politics? What are some major crossroads that you faced that led you down to this area of expertise that you have?
Sure, absolutely. So, I'm kind of that classic high achieving kid in a kind of lower middle class household. So when I was growing up, it was like, oh my gosh, you're good at school. You can do anything, right? So then what did I think I should do? I should become a doctor. So I went to school like pre-med, pre-health. And as much as that was okay, I went to a private Catholic undergrad university. So I had a really comprehensive kind of core curriculum. And in completing other core classes, I actually stumbled across anthropology, cultural anthropology, and really enjoyed the content and the perspective, looking at the world from different lenses than how I grew up. And that kind of led me into sociology. And I like to describe, a lot of people talk about the social science lens of viewing the world with power, inequality, stratification, things like that. And I say absolutely yes, but it's not just a lens. It's like LASIK eye surgery. You can't unsee the world in that way once you start to see the world in that way. And so that really introduced me to sociology through a core curriculum, and I couldn't ever kind of let go of it. I completed my master's in theology, actually, taking a look at kind of a social science application to theology and philosophy. And that kind of led me on my journey to decide to pursue a PhD in sociology. I had amazing mentors and faculty and professors, and that really kind of brought about this desire to just be a professor and help other people see the world in this way.
Very cool. Where does progressive Christian attitudes, religious exiting, stuff like that, where does that come into the story for you?
Oh, sure, absolutely. So, I grew up Catholic, but very a little more like moderate and left-leaning Catholic. Certainly was in a context and a space um, of being Catholic means being pro-life and being anti-abortion, but also I grew up in a Catholic that was like caring for the poor, and my family served our community a lot, and my parents continue to do so. And so I grew up with a um, very much a caring for your neighbor mindset, right? And so
Hmm.
as I noticed as I grew up, I left Catholicism because it felt a little uh, disingenuous or disengaged from the world and from activism. And actually fell into more of an evangelical, non-denominational space of Christianity, which was a wild decade that I spent there. And over my time, both in Catholicism and also evangelical Christianity, I just noticed more and more as things were happening politically and socially um, that the church was moving further right in a conservative space, right? With the pressure to make decisions about LGBTQ folks, with the pressure to kind of encourage parishioners and churchgoers to vote in a particular way and based on certain issues, that as the world was starting to kind of get into these dualistic mindsets of Republican, Democrat, right, left, so too was the church moving, and it was moving in a direction that didn't make sense to me. And so personally I went through that journey with religion. And I was really curious about it because a lot of my peers, a lot of people I knew in religious spaces were experiencing the same kinds of tensions. I actually remember when I was in my evangelical church, I remember laughing and finding a few like-minded people, and we had a small group where we talked about kind of political, social issues, and I called it our progressive support group in the church because everyone else around us seemed to have a very conservative, Republican, right-leaning mindset, and so we made this little group of people who were protesting capitalism and protesting the military industrial complex and things like that. And it seemed um, so different from the context around us in the church. And it just made me really curious. So a lot of this is a personal journey and one that I felt needed to be elucidated in what was happening in American Christianity.
Wonderful. Well, your recently completed dissertation is called A Corrupted Faith: The Role of Power in the Process of Christian Disaffiliation and Rise of the Religious Nuns, which examines the religious exiting process and non religious identity formation of ex Christians. And so I want to go on a little bit of a journey here. It talks kind of like the past couple of decades. Is that right in the text?
Mhm. A little bit contextually. I focus mostly on the last decade since about 2014, 2015, but it kind of positions the reality of what's happened in the last decade in the broader context of the right word politicization of Christianity.
Okay.
Um, So certainly within the last 2 decades, specifically in the last 20 years, there's been quite a lot of rapid disaffiliation, which the Pew Research Center in the religious landscape study charts. Specifically, one kind of section I focus on is just in about 7 years between 2007 and 2014. Pew found that Christian affiliation dropped by 7.8%, which is a really rapid decline when you think about the large arc of demographic change. It was pretty quick within a short period of time. And certainly particular groups changed within that at different rates. And one of their more recent studies in January 2024 found that religious nuns, the non-religious, when I say nuns, Nones, not Nuns. So the non-religious people they found are the single largest religious group in the United States at 27% of affiliation, which is a bit odd to even say that because, of course, I argue that they're not a group. We shouldn't consider them a monolith because they have such different religious experiences, but also they're not religious, right? So to say the non-religious are the largest religious group is a bit odd to begin with. So, but that's a little bit of a look at sort of the demographic change. But that I kind of position that in the long arc of kind of the socio-political change that's happening at the same time with the politicization of religion. That certainly Christianity in the US has always been political, right? That the first colonizers and settlers in the United States were here for religious freedom. primarily, and so that's certainly always been a part of American history and American Christianity. But specifically in the 1960s and 70s, there's a really targeted effort to get politically involved as a counter and a reaction to some of the socio-political movements happening of the sexual revolution, of the civil rights movement, of the Vietnam War protests. There's sort of a really concerted effort on the part of Christians to gain political power. And so that's sort of the longer arc of where I kind of position the last 10 years of change is sort of a coming to fruition of a lot of these decades long plans.
Excellent. So let's talk about these terms: religious disaffiliation, exiting. What are those?
Absolutely. So, not only I'm going to define those, I'm going to throw a few more at you to murky the water even more.
Bring it. Bring it on.
So generally, when we talk about the word disaffiliation, it simply is people's sort of identity markers. That's a term that's used most commonly by demographers and quantitative sort of social scientists that mark who is affiliated or who identifies with what religious groups. So it's kind of a generally a univariate measure, one measure: are you a Christian, are you not? If so, what type of Christian are you? Um, Exiting is sort of a more process, a more action oriented term, right? Of people making the decision to leave religion. And that doesn't generally happen over a short period of time, right? That's why it's exiting. It's sort of an ongoing a gerund of a word. Because it's an ongoing process that does take some time, especially in sort of higher control environments, such as certainly lots of pockets of Christianity. There are two other terms, though. One that's used a lot by social scientists, and not as much by people going through it, and that is the term deconversion.
Mm.
And it seems to encompass both this idea of exiting, this idea of disaffiliation, but it also points to the fact that there's a lot that comes with decoupling oneself from religion, right? Not just the identity, not just the process of going through it, but also going through what one believes about the world, what one believes about things beyond the world, right? Metaphysical, so on and so forth. But so that seems to be a more comprehensive term and a deeper term, right? But the term itself is religiously laden, right? Deconversion is religious based language, right? So my research really focuses on people who've left, people who've been hurt, people who've exited religion. And so using a religious term for the process of leaving religion does not tend to sit very well with people.
Mm.
So part of what I argue and part of the work that I'm trying to do for our space of social science is make an argument for using this socially endogenous term most commonly used by people, which is deconstruction. And that's a term people use really frequently. It seems to resonate. There are certainly concerns with deconstruction. It's a more general term. It's a term that certainly has been whitewashed in spaces, which we need to acknowledge and be concerned about. But it seems to really resonate with people that I talk to that have gone through this process because it encompasses the identity change, but also the exit from communal spaces. Like religion comes with community oftentimes, but it also is a term that recognizes that there's a constant grappling with the ideas and the beliefs and the socialization that has happened in religion. So it tends to hit most of the points of what people go through when they exit religion, which, isn't simply just leaving an identity. It's leaving a community and a belief system and a worldview and often an afterlife worldview, which is that's a lot for someone to leave. And so there's a little bit of a download of some terms.
Excellent. I love it. Well, and if I think about my own experiences, I would far more identify with deconstruction versus deconversion. So, just as in a personal, very casual resonance, I mean, that's kind of where I would land. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? So that makes a lot of sense to me, and it helps to think about this in terms of my own life as well. Maybe listeners out there are thinking about their own lives right now as well.
Sure.
So you've followed these things academically for a long time. So what are some major turning points in the last 20 years that you consider to be benchmarks leading to this
Mhm.
exiting change that we've seen in society?
Yeah, yeah. So I think I want to note like very broadly that in the space of religion, of demography, of social scientists of religion, there's this larger theory of secularization, right? Which in the long arc of history tends to prove fairly valid, right? With increased technology, with increased industrialization, with increased rationality in our society and kind of the prioritization of rationalization, a religion declines, right? It loses its preeminence, it loses its role in society. So that's kind of a long arc of history. But specifically within kind of the last 20 years or the context more of what I'm focusing on, I definitely credit and give a lot of validity to secularization theory. But I think there's something really unique that has happened sociopolitically that has led to more of a rapid disaffiliation recently. And that certainly has to do with the politicization of religion. So I'll turn one of the things that I don't think people note enough in this context is the election of Obama. And certainly, I would turn to and recommend people go seek out Richard Ballmer's work. He has a really kind of short epigraph called Bad Faith, the book that they did turn into a documentary. He's a historian of religion, and he really kind of positions and shows pretty quickly and easily how the movement of the religious right is really rooted in racism, is rooted in white supremacy. That the earliest movements in this counter revolution in the 60s and 70s were really to prevent the desegregation of schools, right? But that didn't land very well. So in order to engage the political masses to come out and vote for the religious right, they turned to abortion, right? But abortion was a secondary, not a priority, right? It was really a protesting of the desegregation of schools. So Richard Ballmer in this work really kind of shows that the election of Obama as the first Black president, it was perceived as a betrayal on the part of white Christians, right? It was against a lot of the efforts that they were doing to amass and retain power. Certainly pivotal is the election of Trump and the support of white Christians and major white religious leaders in support of Trump's nomination in 2015 and his eventual election. A huge element here is a turning point is when the Supreme Court bench got a conservative supermajority. And so that's certainly a major turning points. Brett Kavanaugh's and Amy Coney Barrett being confirmed onto the bench were definitely huge turning points for what's been happening. And then, of course, very recently, I think about the overturning of Roe v. Wade 2 years ago. Certainly, some of these major movements are confirmation of the growing power and political influence of um, the religious right, but also people who use religion in order to accomplish conservative goals.
Yeah, we I recently did an episode with Dr. Celine Ibrahim about the overturning of Roe v. Wade as well, which was a
Sure.
really good conversation. So, excellent overview of the big picture social stuff that and political stuff that happens in society and how it just kind of trickles
Mhm.
down. So in talking to people who leave, what are some major reasons people are saying for why they're leaving American Christian spaces? Just kind of on like the smaller level, on like the person to person level.
Yeah, yeah. So I think I talk about this in my research as like these pivotal moments that people who leave that I chatted with. I talked with 60 ex-Christians who've left in approximately the last 10 years, and everyone kind of had growing discontentment for a long time. Most people did, and I call this building discontentment. That people don't leave simply because of one instance or one issue or one event that happened. That there were a lot of concerns and inconsistencies and kind of building discontentment all along. But some of these main reasons or these main moments really I found are focused on socio-political issues. They're not necessarily focused on religious issues or religious realities. So one of the most common things that came up was how Christianity has treated LGBTQ folk, coming out officially as non-confirming. Not allowing queer folk to be pastors or leaders or to even just simply be married in their church. So these sort of issues were were large reasons people chose to exit. And some of that was personal. Like I had quite a few. I had well over half of my sample kind of falls under the umbrella of LGBTQIA, both with gender and sexual identity. So I certainly had a large representation of queer folk in my sample. But also there were a lot of people who knew a friend or people who just there's a one woman in particular I remember talking to. She's a woman in her 60s, and she said, quote, "I have no ponies in the race." Like she doesn't know anybody that's queer, that's LGBTQ. But she said, but it doesn't make any sense that the God that I know would create someone who would hate themselves because of their identity. And so it was just this kind of inconsistency with perceptions of God, perceptions of Jesus, and then these the kind of practical actions and belief that they saw in the church. And all of these really focused on sociopolitical issues. So anti-LGBTQ sentiment was huge. Sex and sexism, so not allowing women to be leaders and pastors, sort of emphasis on purity culture and virginity, and this sort of like disembodiment of people because of a really narrowly defined sexual ethic. Race and racism was very large. Quite a few people personal experiences of that, but also the witnessing of it. And quite a few people in my sample talked about how the sort of re-energized Black Lives Matter movement in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, and then Christianity's sort of um, stalemate response to that in many cases was really a major propellant for them to exit. And then a couple other things that popped up is certainly Christianity's support for Donald Trump was of huge concern to them, and a major reason people chose to leave, as well as Christianity's almost like fight with COVID seemed to be really huge. Like if you say you're pro-life and you're, pro-people, why are you having us come back in and judging people who wear masks and not distancing? Like that doesn't seem to be believing in the sanctity of life. So again, a long list, and I can give many more examples, but a lot of these things, if you notice, like none of them are really a few people were like, I just don't know if I believed in God, right? Like, but those sorts of thoughts came after some sort of socio-political catalyst, right? Like most people, almost everyone named something that was happening socially as a major reason why they left. And then they started to question whether or not they believed in God in general. They believed the theological tenets of a, monotheistic religion, of Christianity, of Jesus. Those sorts of things seem to happen a little bit later in this process, where the primary catalyst was more so things that were happening in the world.
What are the demographics of Americans that are like leaving in the largest amounts? Is there any research or data available on that?
Somewhat. A lot of this work is a little bit outdated, and so I'm curious. I'd love for Pew. They have probably the most comprehensive data of this. I'd love for them to do some more like intersectional analysis. A lot of it's really kind of people are leaving from this denomination and this, and people are leaving from this gender and not. But overall, I mean, certainly. The group is growing and diversifying, the non-religious, but largely and sort of more historically, mainline Protestants and Catholics are certainly leaving in a larger number than evangelicals are. And then generally, again, don't want to make too much of a blanket statement, but younger cohorts, educated cohorts of individuals, and certainly more moderate and left-leaning political people tend to be those. And I consider them and more like low hanging fruit, right? There were people that maybe were a little bit more questioning to begin with of what was happening. But certainly the religious nuns are growing fairly rapidly. And so to, somewhat some patterns, but also it's a pretty diverse group of people.
Excellent. How do people come to identify after they leave? So when you're in a religious community, you tend to identify a certain way. How do people who exit come to identify after they've left?
Yeah. The vast majority of people that I talked to identified in some sort of realm of agnosticism. And a lot of people, some people use that label. Some people were like, I don't know, but I'm open. I just know this is what I don't believe. And a lot of people were hesitant. A lot of people kind of fell in that bucket of agnostic because they knew they weren't Christian anymore, but they also felt like atheism was a step too far. Like it
Hmm.
felt similarly, a few people defined it as or described it as kind of similarly reductionistic to Christianity. That says Christianity is like Jesus is the way, the truth, the life, right? No one gets to the Father except through me, like this really narrowly defined path. And they said, well, atheism is also a narrowly defined path of there's nothing out there. And so a lot of people were, open to the possibility. Some people defined their agnosticism like using kind of Rhett and Link ear biscuit language, if you're familiar. Uh, of like hopeful agnostic. Like, I want to believe there's something out there. I want to believe there's some sort of grand plan and there is a maker and there is intentional design in our lives and in the world. But most people fell in that agnostic. And most people actually kind of defined, when I kind of coded people's responses and analyzed the data, I would define most people as more of a passive agnostic. And what I mean by that is they were open to the possibility of there being something else out there, but they weren't actively doing anything to figure out if there was, right? They weren't practicing as if there was anything out there. They weren't engaged in any sort of inquiry or, spiritual practices or beliefs to see if there was anything out there. It was like, I don't want to close down the possibility, but I also don't want to engage with the possibility of it. So more of that sort of passive agnostic.
That's kind of like me. I love talking about the social and the historical and the
Yeah.
cultural effects of religion. I think it's so interesting, but I would say that that's kind of like my current
Yeah.
thoughts on the world is that passivity. Although maybe I'm a little less passive than most, considering I host a podcast about religion. Um, okay, so for speaking on a personal level, do you have any like major takeaways for yourself that your research participants kind of
Mm.
left you with?
Yeah, oh gosh, I have so many. I mean,
Mm.
I like first and foremost, I just felt so honored that people would share their stories with me in this way. I mean, religion is very personal. People's experiences in it are very personal, and a lot of people have really gone through hard things with religion. Uh, and so I'm very, very immensely grateful that people were willing to share their stories with me. I think some of the things that came out, or some of my major takeaways that participants left me with, was a sense of urgency in sharing these stories. Of they see the news, they see what's happening, and they want to share their stories. They want to get this out there. They were all so. I had so many people that thanked me for doing the work. I'm like, you're the one who spent an hour and a half with me, telling me these really personal and intimate things about what's, your experience in religion, yet they were thanking me for doing this work. And so I felt very encouraged and empowered to start sharing these stories as much as possible. Obviously, I had some hoops to jump through. I had to write a dissertation, had to defend that, but I'm excited and encouraged to share their stories, because I think people want their stories out there. They want to hear what's really happening kind of behind closed doors.
What are you working on next? What are you excited about?
So I have a couple of papers in process, more sort of scholarly journal articles in process. And but really I'm working on putting together a book proposal to make this kind of in a larger, more general audience, really to do what participants asked, which is share their stories. And I think doing that in sort of a more general audience book will be much more accessible to people, as I try as much as possible to get my scholarly work in an accessible space, but also with paywalls, with limited resources, sometimes that's a little more difficult. But so not only that, kind of a general audience book, but I'm also really seeking opportunities to share what I'm learning with people. So writing in public spaces, I've done one blog post on a non-religion research network. I've been in contact with a few different podcasts around deconstruction and religious exiting to do other conversations about what I'm learning from this community. So really sharing as much as possible with the stories of what I've learned. Yeah.
You did a 2025 Sacred Rights Public Scholarship cohort training. What were some of your big takeaways from doing that with the group?
Oh wow. I was so grateful for the opportunity. I think I was so energized to be around people who are also committed to doing public scholarship is amazing. I've always been really conflicted and frustrated by the fact that so much of scholarship is not inherently public. And maybe that's me as a social scientist, where I'm like, my job is to literally study society. So why wouldn't society be the beneficiary of my work, right? Why wouldn't society be able to access and read and know what's happening? And so I've always kind of challenged that in sociology, that there is this separate thing called public sociology, because inherently I believe all sociology should be public because we're studying the public. And so inherently it's public and inherently it's collective. And I'm been surprised by the amount of pushback. And I think that's the capitalism inherent in higher education. That's this sort of the need to produce as a measure of value that's inherent in academia. And yeah, so the sacred rights program was foundational in really encouraging and exciting me to go and to do this work, to know that there are other people out there that are experiencing these same sort of tensions within academia and are committed to ensuring that their work is publicly accessible and available.
Wonderful. Well, if people want to follow along with your work in the future, where would you direct folks' attention if they want to keep in touch in the future and see what you got going on?
Yeah, I think the best way, the most general, since I'm a little bit in transition, the best way probably is on my website, which is just my name, tessstarman.com. And you can contact me via that. You can see research briefings of what I've done. Certainly lots of information there. I am on Blue Sky. I will say I'm not great at it. The transition from Twitter was not great. Not that I was great on there to begin with, but I check
Yeah.
that a lot less often. But I am on Blue Sky. If you want to connect there, though, yeah, not the best at updating that. But so I encourage people to check out my website and engage with content there.
Wonderful. Well, Dr. Tess Starman, I'm following you on Blue Sky as we speak, so I will see you over there. And thank you so much for coming on Classical Ideas to tell me about your work. You do need to update your Blue Sky bio because you are no longer a PhD candidate. You are a doctor. So, Dr. Tess Starman, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a blast.
Thanks so much, Greg. Happy to be here.